This Friday, Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back to switch things up in Disney's Freakier Friday.
Totally, yes.
It's an absolute riot.
Woo!
And the only movie that can be described as...
So much weirder than the last time.
What last time?
It's the frequel.
You ready?
We've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays.
What deeply out-of-touch old person came up with that?
You did.
Wow.
Don't miss the comedy event of the summer for all ages. Disney's Freakier Friday. In theaters this Friday. Get tickets now. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
This episode is brought to you by the world's first reposado from Tequila Herradura. Made with slow-cooked, hand-harvested agave sealed into oak barrels and aged 11 months. Before being enjoyed in your glass. Experience the world's first reposado. Tequila Herradura. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Tequila Herradura. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Herradura is a registered trademark. Copyright 2025 Brown-Forman Corporation.
It's Wednesday, Addams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday, Season 2, begins August 6th, only on Netflix.
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised.
These shoes were the sneakers were the ones I used when I put the body in the freezer. These two sneakers here.
That's Bill Rothstein. I want to paint a picture for you. He's a middle-aged man with a white, scruffy beard and a big belly, which is contained inside these weathered denim overalls. He looks harmless, the type of guy who uses all the little front pockets in his overalls. At 59 years old, he's a substitute teacher for the Erie, Pennsylvania School District. But he also could have a side hustle as a mall Santa Claus. But in that clip that you just heard, Bill Rothstein is talking to police because of a phone call he made to 911 on September 21st, 2003, telling the dispatcher that at his home on Peach Street, there was a body in a freezer inside of his garage. This call would prompt Bill to go down to the station, where he tells police he had nothing to do with the murder of James Roden, the guy in his freezer, and that he'd been so guilt-ridden after being asked to help cover up this murder by his ex-fiancée, Marjorie Deal Armstrong, that after he'd attempted to commit suicide unsuccessfully, he decided to call the police.
She had a body in her house that she wanted to remove. I helped her with it. I put it basically in my garage. And that Saturday, she wanted it completely destroyed. Okay, the one being Marjorie Armstrong, Marjorie Deal Armstrong. Marjorie Deal's her maiden name. Marjorie Armstrong was her married name. I would call the state police because I did not want anything to do with that. And I was also fearful of what would happen to me should she find that out, or should I refuse to do that.
Bill's relationship with Marjorie Deal Armstrong was complicated. But in the beginning of this interview, he would try to make it seem less so, saying that in the late 60s, early 1970s, he'd dated Marjorie and that at one time they'd even been engaged. But even though the romantic relationship hadn't lasted, he'd begrudgingly remained friends with her. But the reality was, he'd only helped Marjorie because he was afraid of her. Really wasn't sure of what she was capable of.
We went together, I think, and then we got engaged like the first year. Engaged for about like 9 months, and then after that, I didn't talk to her that much. She would call me occasionally, but it got to be that she has emotional problems, and she would ask me what to do about different items, and she wouldn't listen to me, and I got tired of hearing her go over these things all the time. So I basically developed a situation where I just didn't contact her unless, or would not speak to her or talk to her unless I had information that would help her about bipolar problems, which I think she had, and I kind of tried to stay away from her as much as possible. I did not physically see her, I try to avoid her phone calls as much as possible.
Bill says that weeks earlier, Marjorie had come to him once again for help, with an incredible ask. That in mid-August of 2003, she'd shot and killed her 45-year-old boyfriend, Jim, after a heated argument, and that she needed Bill's help to dispose of the body.
And she feels that anything that happens is somebody else's fault, no matter what it is. It's somebody else's fault, never hers.
Investigators would find a body stuffed inside a freezer at his home on Peach Street, and it was Jim Roden. Bill was telling the truth. But what Bill wasn't sharing was that the murder of James Roden was just the tip of an iceberg in what would later be described as, quote, one of the most complicated and bizarre crimes in the annals of the FBI. And Bill Rothstein, you know, the guy who looked like a mall Santa, wasn't exactly as he was portraying himself. The tortured, guilt-ridden friend of his ex, Marjorie Deal Armstrong.
What do you think was in there?
Well, if there's a liver, it's probably not a human liver. It's maybe she had liver for her dogs or her cats. If she had dogs and cats.
So it appeared there was a bag of blood.
That's me.
Okay.
Okay, and a razor blade in the bottom of it.
Okay.
That was I. It was I. Okay.
And what is that?
Stupid attempted suicide. You guys got my note? Nobody got the note?
Yeah,
that was okay. 3 pieces of paper.
Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 104, The Notorious Pizza Bomb Caper.
Did find the notes where you talked to on the desk.
Okay.
Why did you think to ask or to put in there about it wasn't related to Wells?
So you wouldn't go hog wild saying, oh, this has to do with the Wells shit, and then be more shit in the newspaper and everything else. It kind of goes along with the last 2 things like, geez, I'm sorry this shit happened. It's that kind of thing. But I wanted you guys to know so you don't have to waste your time trying to figure out, is this part of the Wells situation or not? Because you guys would have been, for another couple of years, working on that shit with that.
We're going to get back to Bill and the body that's frozen solid in his home on Peach Street. But to understand this twisted and complicated investigation, we've got to go backwards in time, 3 weeks, to a bizarre event that Rothstein is alluding to here, the Wells incident.
Put in there about it wasn't related to Wells.
So you wouldn't go hog wild saying, oh, this has to do with the Wells shit, and then be more shit in the newspaper and everything else.
Which in his suicide note would say had nothing to do with the murder of James Roden by his ex-fiancée from 35 years ago, Marjorie Deal Armstrong. So, roughly 3 weeks earlier, on August 28th, 2003, 46-year-old Brian Wells walked into a bank in a suburb of Erie, Pennsylvania at around 2:30 in the afternoon. Brian, a balding middle-aged guy, normally wouldn't attract much attention, but on that day, he stands out as he waits in line for a teller. He's acting casual, in spite of a black cane in one hand and some kind of apparatus around his neck. There's a bulky outline under his white t-shirt which appears mechanical, and whatever it is, possibly medical, looks uncomfortable. When it's Brian Wells' turn at the teller's window, he hands over a note saying that bank employees had 15 minutes to fill a bag with $250,000. To accentuate this point, he lifts up his shirt, revealing a metal box-like device which is locked onto his neck. The note warns that if he doesn't get the money, the bomb's going to detonate. The teller explains that the bank doesn't have that kind of money on hand, and Wells says, "Just give me what you have." He's handed a bag filled with around $9,000. Brian Wells grabs the money, and before walking out the door, he grabs a free Dum Dum lollipop and puts it in his mouth. Outside, he climbs into his car, a beat-up Geo Metro, and takes off. But Brian Wells doesn't make it far. He's in a nearby parking lot, standing outside of his vehicle, when state troopers pull up, take him to the ground, and place handcuffs around his wrists. Brian calmly tells the troopers that he's an innocent victim. He's a pizza delivery driver, and he was making a delivery to an address. And when he got there, 3 black men jumped him, forced the bomb collar around his neck, and told him that it would only be removed after he got the $250,000 from the bank. As Brian is sitting on the concrete, police weren't sure what to believe. He seemed pretty calm for someone who said that there was a bomb around his neck, but still, they had to take the threat seriously, so they cleared the streets, barricading Brian Wells between 2 patrol cars as they waited for the bomb squad to arrive, which was taking some time. And in the meantime, a local TV news crew had set up nearby with a view to record Brian Wells on the ground, his hands cuffed behind him, with this alleged bomb strapped around his neck. Even though the camera was a ways back, it was still able to pick up Brian Wells, appearing to say, "Why isn't anyone coming to get this thing off me?" Then, "I don't have a lot of time. He started a timer. It's gonna go off. I'm not lying. Did you call my boss?" Not long after Brian's exclamations, the bomb starts making a beeping sound that's fast and loud and continuous. It's clear from Brian's demeanor that he's beginning to panic in a way that he hadn't before. He's scooching back as if he's trying to get away from the sound. But how can he? It's coming from the apparatus around his neck that he believes is a bomb. And then suddenly, his eyes widen at what to him must have felt like the deafening sound of doom, that beeping sound, and then, boom. The bomb around his neck exploded at 3:18 p.m. on live television, and Brian Wells would be killed instantly. It's a shock to all who witnessed the detonation of that bomb, saw the horror and panic in Brian Wells' eyes. And it was even more shocking when investigators would find out that indeed, Wells was a pizza delivery driver. He had been for 30 years. And in his car, police had found pages of complicated instructions of where Brian was supposed to drive to get the key and combination to safely remove the collar bomb. But when Brian had been on the ground, talking to police, he hadn't said who had done this to him, only that he'd been jumped by 3 black men. Inside his vehicle, they also found a wooden cane, the one that he'd been seen with inside the bank. And upon further inspection, they realized that cane had been converted into a single-barrel homemade shotgun. Authorities raced to Brian's place of employment, Mamma Mia's Pizzeria, where they were told by his fellow employees that he was a simple and quiet, hardworking, dependable guy, not a bank robber, not someone who would build a bomb and lock it around his own neck. They'd also learned that Brian had just finished his shift and was walking out the door when a call came in for a delivery order of 2 small pizzas, and Brian said he'd do it. Investigators would track down that address where Brian was sent to deliver those pizzas, and it was to a TV transmission tower at the edge of town on Peach Street. There, they found Brian's shoe impressions and tire tracks, which matched his vehicle, but those were the only clues. And when they tracked the call to Mamma Mia's for those pizzas, it was traced to a gas station on Peach Street, near the tower station. When a search warrant was executed at Brian's home, they wouldn't find any bomb-making materials. Meantime, FBI agents collected every piece of the material related to the collar bomb and sent them to Quantico for testing. A report would reveal that the bomb was crude in its manufacture, but diabolical in its design. And they wondered if Brian would even be capable of engineering such a device. And if he had somehow done that, why would he blow himself up? It just didn't make sense. It would be determined that whoever had made the bomb was not an amateur. The bomb had 2 timing mechanisms. Basically, they were just kitchen timers. Little clues led investigators to believe that this bomb and bank robbery were part of a larger conspiracy, because the timers inside the bomb had been initiated before Brian had even walked into the bank, which meant the clock was ticking for him. There was even a booby trap contained inside of the bomb within wire mesh that was connected to a mechanism, which meant if the bomb squad had gotten there before one of the kitchen timers went off, there were 2 inside of the bomb, anyone who touched the mesh inside that little booby trap section would trigger another circuit, which would have detonated. The way that the device was engineered led investigators to believe that this bomb wasn't just a threat in a bank robbery, but the designer wanted to inflict carnage, because it was going to go off no matter what. And it didn't matter to the engineer who got caught in the crossfire. Unfortunately, the FBI lab wasn't able to find any trace evidence of the bomb maker on the device, no fingerprints or DNA. But a profiler would say that whoever made the bomb had a background in electronics, would have a workshop in his house, and that he'd probably be a shop teacher. But without any other leads to run down related to the strange case of the bank robbery and the bombing death of the pizza delivery driver, Brian Wells, the case stalled.
This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Summer's almost out and fall's calling. Luckily, Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead, all under $100. Discover new arrivals from your favorite brands like Mango, Princess Polly, Wave, Free People, BDG, and more. Whether you're planning a last-minute getaway, heading back to class, or refreshing your office looks, you'll find the latest trends and beauty must-haves without breaking your budget. It's easy, too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores, and at Nordstrom.com.
On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
Una silla de masajes puede parecer extravagante. 8 configuraciones diferentes, intensidad ajustable, además es calefaccionado. Y se siente tan bien. Sí, una silla de masajes puede parecer extravagante. Y 2, bueno, aún más. Pero cuando esas sillas de masajes vienen con un auto, se vuelven bastante prácticas. El nuevo Volkswagen Tiguan 2025 con funciones premium como los asientos delanteros con masaje disponibles. Solo parece extravagante.
Right now, at the Home Depot, you'll find storage solutions made to fit your needs. Grab an HDX Tough Tilt to protect your tools. Or keep your sports equipment contained with reinforced snap-fit lids. Or stack up and make better use of your space with bins and totes built to last. Whatever you're storing, we've got the gear to keep it organized and protected at the Home Depot. How doers get more done.
But all of that would change on September 21st, 3 weeks after the bank robbery and bomb explosion, with one phone call. Remember this guy?
These shoes were the sneakers were the ones I used when I put the body in the freezer. These 2 sneakers here.
You met him earlier, Bill Rothstein, the 59-year-old who wore denim overalls and was a part-time shop teacher, who had called 911 saying he had a dead guy in a freezer at his home on Peach Street. Investigators aren't thinking anything about the robbery and bomb detonation when they talked to Bill at the police station. And they wanted to know more about Marjorie Deal Armstrong and the circumstances that would lead Bill to have this guy in his freezer. Investigators would learn that Marjorie Deal was born in 1949, that she'd lived in Erie, Pennsylvania her entire life, and she was the only child of parents who ran a successful small business. Marjorie was extremely intelligent. She graduated at the top of her class in high school, and she was beautiful with big blue eyes and thick black hair. But it wasn't just her beauty that enraptured people. She was charismatic, magnetic, which had drawn a young Bill Rothstein to her. Bill was also a brilliant guy and a member of the Mensa Club. Marjorie and Bill dated in high school, and they were engaged in their early 20s, but would ultimately break up. Marjorie went on to earn a graduate degree, but after college, her mental health started slipping. Some would say she was high-strung, emotional, histrionic, but really, she was suffering from a mental break. Her official diagnosis would be bipolar disorder and depression. Marjorie would be medicated, and she was able to hold down a series of high-stress jobs in managerial positions over the years. And in 1990, at the age of 41, she would marry a man named Richard Armstrong. But tragically, the marriage wouldn't last. In 1992, Marjorie would rush Richard to the hospital, saying that he'd fell and hit his head on a table, and he would die from that injury. In fact, Marjorie would sue the hospital for malpractice, saying they didn't do enough to save him. And ultimately, the case would be settled out of court for $250,000. And by 2003, apparently, Marjorie still had around $60,000 left from that settlement when she murdered her boyfriend, James Roden.
There was a suit against St. Vincent, I believe, and her husband, her past husband, had died at the hospital, and supposedly there was a gag order, so she wouldn't tell me what there was for money, and she got money and she didn't have to pay any taxes on, so legally this money was hers, and she kept it in a purse. She slept on that purse.
By 2003, though, Marjorie had stopped working as her mental health issues had become more pronounced. She got by on disability payments, the settlement from her husband's death, and her wealthy father helped out. He'd even bought her the home that she was living in, the one she would come to share with James Roden, her live-in boyfriend of 9 years. Both were extremely reclusive and kept to themselves. Until, according to Bill, Marjorie had shot her boyfriend while he was sleeping, and that afterwards she'd gone over to Bill's house to ask him for his help in cleaning up and disposing of the body.
I think I said I would go over and look. I did not indicate that I would do anything. I think I said I'd go over and take a look and see what the situation was. Because I wasn't really sure if she was kidding. I mean,
she's just asking you for help at this time. Did she spell out what kind of help she needs at this time, or she just said, help me?
I think she said, help me.
The thing about Bill is he's so wanting to distance himself from Marjorie. He acts like he avoided her calls and wouldn't let her into his house. She was histrionic and suffered from mental illness. But from the beginning, when he walked up the stairs to the bedroom, where he saw Jim Roden's body lying in the bed in a fetal position, he was all in. It was nighttime when Bill wrapped Jim's body up in some tarps, then drags him down the stairs and pulls him into his van. He helps Marjorie clean up the bedroom, then takes the corpse to his home, where he backs up his van against the garage, rolls up the door, and brings the body inside. Here's Bill giving investigators a tour of his home.
Somebody had said that pulleys were used.
I said that. Back there, not here.
Okay, you back where?
Where the body is.
Right, where the freezer was.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll show you when we get back there.
Okay, what came in first, the body or the freezer?
The body came in, I put it on a cart. I'll show you where the cart is. The cart that has big wheels, not the cart with the small wheels. Yes, one? That one there. That's where the body went on to, and I'm not sure the time sequence. We've gone over this before, but I had that in here and probably back there when I went out to pick up the freezer.
How long was the body in here before the freezer came?
I don't know for sure.
Then he helps Marjorie dispose of the murder weapon, a 12-gauge shotgun, by melting it with a blowtorch.
Brought in a acetylene torch in here, and I used the acetylene torch here to cut it up completely and reduce it to slag. So it wasn't really cut up, it was more like melted.
The body would stay inside the freezer at Bill's place, but with every day that passed, Marjorie kept pressuring him that they needed to cut up the corpse and dispose of the body for good, where no one would find him. But for Bill, somehow that was a bridge too far, which is what prompted him to call 911 in a panic. That night, both Marjorie and Bill would be arrested for the murder of James Roden. But when investigators were at Bill's house, it was dark. He lived at the edge of town, and when they stood outside, a detective notices lights in the sky, and it suddenly dawns on them just how close they are to those TV towers where that pizza delivery driver claimed he'd been lured and had a bomb collar strapped around his neck 3 weeks before. And remember, there was that strange suicide note that Bill had left because he felt guilty about helping Marjorie cover up the murder. But why was the first line in that letter, "This has nothing to do with the Wells case"?
I did find the notes where you talked to on the desk.
Okay.
Why did you think to ask or to put in there about it wasn't related to Wells?
So you wouldn't go off hog wild saying, oh, this has to do with the Wells shit, you know, and then be more shit in the newspaper and everything else. It kind of goes along with the last two things like, geez, I'm sorry this shit happened. You know, it's that kind of thing. But I wanted you guys to know so you don't have to waste your time trying to figure out, is this part of the Wells situation or not? Because you guys would have been, for another couple of years, working on that shit with that.
Police tried to interview Marjorie, but she wouldn't talk. So they went back to Bill, who from the beginning made it very clear how highly intelligent he was, that he had a degree in electrical engineering and was a substitute teacher who specialized in robotics. But when they asked him about the pizza bomb robbery, he would deny having any involvement, which wasn't fooling anyone. Remember, earlier in the show, I mentioned that the FBI's profiler had theorized that the unknown bomb maker would potentially be a shop teacher with an electrical engineering background. Not only did Bill match that description, but he also lived less than 500 feet away from the towers where the pizza delivery driver claimed that he'd been lured. Investigators would obtain a search warrant for Marjorie's home, but they soon found out that she was a hoarder and her house was filled from floor to ceiling with junk and garbage. Rothstein would offer to help investigators navigate through the hoard, but it wouldn't be easy getting to the upper floor where the murder had taken place.
Those chairs over there, all three of them are broken. They're sitting in there. She picked up things off the side of the road. When she was with me once, she picked up like a toy school dollhouse or something. They had one side missing. She picked up something else. She would say, you think that's good? Do you think those people want to sell it, or are they just giving it away? She would just pick it up. And her psychiatrist, I guess, said that was good for her. And supposedly the story was she told me that I think she feels that she didn't have toys or things when she was younger. She's an only child. Maybe they didn't give her any. And so she picks up all this crap and stuff you see there. If you go in there, you can see all kinds of stuff. Some of the stuff that's up at my place up on Page Street is some of the kind of stuff she collects, and some of it you're just going to wonder why she ever grabbed it. Okay. All right, hold up.
In that bedroom, Bill describes how he found Jim Roden lying in the fetal position on the bed.
And his head was here?
This is his back here.
Okay.
He was facing that way in a semi-fetal position, which is something like...
Okay.
Laying on his left side facing the wall.
Okay.
Right. And I think the leg was maybe kicked out or something like that. I don't recall for sure. Okay. But something like that.
Okay.
And so what I did was I picked up the cover here. I picked this up, pulled it down this way. I put a cut piece of green tarp down here to put his body on. Okay. All right, so I dragged this bed sheet over to here on top of the tarp. Then I took the tarp and folded it up around it and tried to use some duct tape and packaging tape to wrap it up. Okay.
Underneath debris in Marjorie's home, they would find a couple of ads that were circled pertaining to shotguns for sale in the classifieds, and that they were able to find the seller of one of those shotguns who identified Marjorie as the person he'd sold his shotgun to, and that she'd been with a man who matched the description of Bill Rothstein. This was before her boyfriend's murder. Detectives digging into Marjorie's background would uncover a disturbing trend: that Jim wasn't the first partner of Marjorie's to meet his demise. In 1984, Marjorie was charged with the murder of her boyfriend, Robert Thomas, who she shot 6 times as he slept. She would claim self-defense, saying that he was physically abusive, and she would be acquitted. And if you'll recall, Marjorie's husband, Richard Armstrong, died in 1992 from a brain aneurysm from blunt force trauma to the head. Marjorie had told ER doctors that he'd fallen and hit his head on a table. No charges were ever filed. Authorities were convinced that not only had Marjorie murdered her husband and that Bill had helped her cover it up, but they were both somehow involved in the pizza bombing robbery that led to the death of Brian Wells. However, the investigation would stall when Marjorie was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial for the murder of James Roden, which meant she couldn't be questioned about the collar bombing. And Bill wasn't talking either. Soon after Marjorie was found incompetent to stand trial, he was in a hospital battling cancer. On his deathbed, investigators went to see him. They tried to get him to confess to his role in the pizza bombing, but he wouldn't budge. And he died 4 days later, in July of 2004. But by the end of 2004, Marjorie had been deemed competent to stand trial, but chose to make a deal, pleading guilty to the murder of James Roden in January of 2005 for a reduced sentence of 7 to 20 years. And not long after, the FBI would make another run at speaking to Marjorie about the bombing plot. Marjorie pretty much blamed the whole thing on Bill Rothstein, but she did allude to the fact that the bomb and the murder of James Roden were connected, but she wouldn't say how. But investigators continued to push, and when the name Kenneth Barnes came up, she got really mad. Ken had been a friend of Marjorie's. He had a background in television repair, and he had a history of dealing drugs. Authorities would lean on 56-year-old Ken in August of 2005, and he would admit to his role in the bombing plot. Ken confirmed that Bill Rothstein had built the bomb, and that Ken had been tasked to contribute a few components. But it came as a real shock when the true motivation for the bank robbery was revealed. According to Ken, Marjorie was the mastermind behind the entire thing. And the reason she wanted to rob the bank was because she needed $250,000 to pay Ken to kill her father. Marjorie believed that her father was squandering her inheritance, but Ken's price was $250,000. Ken's confession would earn him a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Marjorie, he would receive a 22-year sentence for his role in the bomb plot. In October of 2010, Marjorie would stand trial for her role in the 2003 bank robbery and bombing plot that killed Brian Wells. A jury would find her guilty on all charges, and she was sentenced to life plus 30 years. But she would die 7 years later, at the age of 68, after refusing treatment for breast cancer. But still, there are so many unanswered questions. Chief among them was Brian Wells, the pizza delivery driver, a co-conspirator, or an innocent victim. Authorities believe that Wells had been a part of the robbery at first. He thought the collar bomb would be fake, but when he learned that it was real and that it was being strapped around his neck, he tried to back out, and he was forced to wear it at gunpoint. It's also believed that Brian Wells was always destined to die once that collar had been placed around his neck. Whether he was truly an innocent victim all along or a bit player in this conspiracy. Either way, the plan had always been, by the masterminds behind the plot, to kill the witness. And the way that the bomb was designed was proof of that. Ken Barnes would also testify that the reason Marjorie had murdered her boyfriend, James Roden, was because he was horrified by this diabolical plot and was planning to go to the police to tell authorities what he knew. And as for Bill Rothstein's involvement, it's believed that his motivation wasn't money, but rather for his own personal pleasure. Over the years, he had bragged about getting away with the perfect crime. Don't go anywhere. Up next, Criminal Mischief bonus content. Here, my co-host, Brandon Morgan, and I will discuss the case in more detail. And there's so much more to this investigation you'll want to hear about. And as always, thanks for listening.